Hoping everybody can hear me okay.
Yep.
All right. Hello, hello. Welcome. Hello from sunny Alaska, where I'm sitting here today, talking to y'all. I'd like to welcome back and welcome all new attendees of the second edition of the Climate Pods series. We're super excited and happy to have you all here with us. Um, Very excited that today we'll be diving into the nexus between climate and water. So this series, just to keep brief intro on the Climate Pod series, the series sets out to explore critical nexuses within the unfolding climate crisis in an effort to further relate this often impersonal mega topic. So now we're using the global goals as a roadmap to continue to explore the stories and the larger narrative surrounding the often hard to hold topic that is the climate change. So quick intro, my name is Stephen Carlson. I'm proud to represent the Youth Climate Leaders Global Network, one of the incredible partners putting on this series alongside Karina Weinstein over there from FXB. Quick intro, Youth Climate Leaders started 2 years ago in Brazil, has since expanded over to have members in 20 plus countries. It's a youth-led organization network that is trying to equip its members with opportunities to connect and engage in solutions through climate actions and, more importantly, climate careers. So as I mentioned today, we have the Water Pod. It's going to be featuring some incredible guest speakers alongside some opportunities for us to reflect on what our stories and what our words and connections to these topics, and particularly where water and climate converge. So before my colleague Karina introduces one of our lovely speakers today, I'd like to kind of go over just a bit of logistics. I know we're all really familiar with Zoom these days. So just a couple of notes. We've got the chat section on our right. We're going to be utilizing that, and we're going to be asking everybody to stay on mute just to limit the interferences, unintended interferences with during today's sessions. All right. But we will have opportunities for y'all to speak. But we just ask when those times aren't now, just to keep yourself on mute, and we appreciate that. We will be recording this session as well, but we will not be recording any of the in-between sections, which are going to be doing a little bit more personal reflective work, so we won't be recording those. All right, I will hand it over to my beautiful colleague, Karina.
Thanks, Steve, and welcome everyone to our Climate Pod focusing on water. It's so great to welcome some of you back, and to the new participants, welcome. We're really excited. So I work for FXB. We're an international organization that was founded 30 years ago to implement the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and have really been a leading force on children's rights issues over the years. And we believe that climate change is the child rights issue of the 21st century. So we started a program called FXB Climate Advocates, where we empower young people with tools and resources to become effective climate advocates. So without much further ado, I'm really thrilled to introduce our keynote speaker, Katie Patrick. Katie is an environmental engineer and a software designer. She's the author of the book and podcast, How to Save the World, and a TEDx speaker on the critical role of creativity, optimism, and imagination in the craft of social and environmental change. Thank you so much, Katie, for joining us, and I'm going to turn it over to you. So I'm going to mute myself and turn my camera off as well. Thank you, Katie. Welcome.
Am I unmuted now? Hi, thank you. Thanks for introducing me. I'm delighted to be here. So I have a guest lecture that I have that's a screen share where we can dive quite sort of deeply into this nexus of how to design environmental data to create change, which is really my passion, and there's a lot of visual stuff in there. Are you happy for me to jump in and start with the screen share?
Yes, go right ahead. Thank you.
Okay.
So you should have a share screen button on the bottom.
Okay, so I'm in my...
Next to the chat bubble, you should have, do you see a share screen? Yeah, beautiful. Awesome.
Okay. So if I go to present, sorry everybody, it's always a little bit awkward online to get these things going smoothly.
Perfect, we can see your screen.
Okay, we've got the little thing of everybody over here, but that shouldn't be too bad. Okay. Oh, okay. Oh dear. We ready to dive in? Is that all set, Karina?
Yes, it's all set. Thank you,
Yep.
Katie.
Okay, everybody. Okay, sorry about getting set up. It's great to be here. Thanks everybody for coming along to the Climate Pod. So I'm going to jump straight into this this lecture that I give, and then we can chat about it and have questions at the end. Now, a lot of the stuff is not necessarily about water, but I'm an environmental engineer. A lot of that is studying like the physics and the chemistry of water. So you can apply it all to water. It can be applied to any environmental or social change issue. So let's get in. We're all here because we want to change the world, right? But you may have been involved with a whole bunch of different projects. We get quite fuzzy about how it is we want to actually affect change. So you might have been to a protest or started an event, or maybe you've read a book or even written a book. You might want to make a documentary. You might have been to a conference, a blog, you might study something, have an art project, get an event, start a social network. But we have to ask this fundamental question whenever we're trying to change the world, which is, are we actually doing anything? And by that, I mean, are we making change that is measurable? We often don't necessarily strongly correlate the effort that we're putting into change and if it's actually making a measurable result. It might sound pretty obvious, but you'd be amazed how often people get this wrong. And there's this really nasty problem that comes up in environmental change that not enough people know about. And it is that educating people about issues like glaciers or polar bears or water pollution, it works in getting people concerned. If you tell somebody all this horrible stuff is happening in the world, they'll be pretty emotionally concerned. But however, when this is tested with a study of testing whether it affects people, it actually does not create action. All right, I'm just trying to get my little bubble away. It doesn't lead to action. So when you're thinking, if people only knew about the issue, if people only cared, then they'd change. Well, not really. People can know a lot and they can care a lot and do absolutely nothing. And this phenomenon is called the value action gap, and it's been studied and tested widely. It can be also called the information deficit hypothesis. And so what we need to do when we're approaching change is look at the brain having a motivational core and it having a lot of doors to get to. How are you going to get to this motivational core? And there can be a lot of different ways. Are you trying to shame people? Are you trying to educate people? Are you trying to motivate people? Like, what is this particular door? What is the psychological mechanism that you're using to get people to do stuff? And this is what I became really fascinated about. And so I dove into this field of environmental psychology, and it started unveiling to me how you actually get people to do stuff. What is the psychological mechanism for actually getting somebody who perhaps didn't care about buying secondhand clothes or didn't care about recycling or about growing their own vegetables, and then they suddenly do, and they're acting on this every single day. And so this is the book. It's full of nuggets of wisdom and academic research. If you wanted to get a copy, and so now I practice these tools in my own design work, and I work on projects that optimize this environmental psychology. As I said, I started in environmental engineering, then I went into the creative industries. I made a magazine and blogs and videos and website trying to tell the story about how to change the world. How could we actually change the world? And I thought that making content and making videos and making amazing events, that getting people to be educated about changing the world and caring was enough. And then I started to really dig into it, and I realized that I was making this mistake. And that's why I got so stuck into this academic research and where the book came out. So what I'm going to teach you today is this 3 different chapters from my book that I think are the most poignant, the most important ones. The book is a 10-step process, but there's 3 that really stand out. And you should apply this to every single change project that you're working on. So it's called MVA, and it starts with 1, measurement, measuring what you're trying to change. 2, coming up with a vision for the world that you want. And 3, action, meaning behavior. How are you going to get people who are involved in your cause to actually not just care, but take action? And it's quite a methodical process you can go through to make this come true. So you can distill it into 3 steps. These are the 3 things that I make sure everything I work on covers. And 1 is that you're using the public disclosure of data. Is the data about your cause up there in everybody's face for everyone to see? And when you start looking around at this, environmental data is never anywhere for anyone to see. So that's a big thing that we can change. And the second thing is, are we comparing people to each other? You know, what is my water use next to my neighbor's water use? What about my town's lake quality versus the next door town's lake quality? We need to compare anything we can possibly compare to each other. It's an incredibly powerful psychological mechanism. And the third one is just applying color to the numbers. Are you letting people know that red is bad? If it was a lake, you could have a sign that turned red with a light on it that turned red every time a particular toxin went up, and it was green when it wasn't. We really aren't using the traffic light system or the color system nearly as much as we could be. Okay, so getting into the data. So we start with identifying your problem as a real world metric. And so what I mean by this, if people here are environmental scientists, environmental engineers, you'll probably be pretty familiar with understanding the particular numbers around your cause, but you would be amazed how many people get into trying to change the world and they really haven't looked into the data. They haven't read all of the studies, they haven't looked into the spreadsheets and really tried to figure out, you know, what is going on numerically. And it's a really big issue for not-for-profits and people that are trying to change the world, really overlooking this. And I would say, you know, 8 out of 10 people who work on social and environmental change have not done enough of a deep dive into the numbers as they should be doing. And so in 2013, Bill Gates wrote this in his annual letter. It was all about measurement. And he said, you can achieve amazing progress if you set a clear goal and find a measure that will drive progress towards that goal. This may seem pretty basic, but it is amazing to me how often it is not done and how hard it is to get right. You might also be familiar with Paul Graham. He's the founder of Y Combinator. That's the coolest thing, incubator that you can get into in Silicon Valley. He has a whole essay that says merely measuring something has an uncanny tendency to improve it. And now this phenomenon is true. So if you look into the academic literature, it's called the disclosure of data or targeted transparency. And it is known, it has been seen to create dramatic change. And there's one example, one very powerful example in environmental change that I'll take you through now. And this is called the EPA's Toxic Release Inventory. Now, some of you might have already heard of it, but most people haven't heard of it. So this came about after the Bhopal disaster in India, where there was a big tragic gas leak incident. The EPA started asking corporations in America as to how much toxic chemicals they were using. Now, this was not meant to be public marketing at all. The EPA weren't planning on fining anybody. It was just an accounting measure. They just wanted to understand how much was out there. And so the companies had to fill out a form and send it in. Now, what they found is that after 5 years of doing this, something kind of miraculous happened, was that toxic chemical use in the USA went down by 45%. And now if you think of any of the issues that we're working on with climate change or forestry or zero waste, I mean, 45% is a huge number. I mean, it's hard to even stop it getting worse, let alone cutting it by half. So all these people started studying why this was so successful. And they found that just showing people the numbers had an effect. And so in this next example, you can find it replicated over and over again. So just showing in a college dorm, showing people a number of the amount of paper that was recycled in a recycling bin. Now, this is just a really small example that you could replicate in any office or school room. The paper recycling went up by 77%. And I have many examples of this particular phenomenon in my book. It's kind of the baseline theory. And so what I mean by examples of real world data, and it may sound silly to bring this up, but people get it scrambled. So I need to go over it. So real world data is stuff that you can measure in pounds or liters or just physical mass, you know, like carbon dioxide, water pollution, beef consumption, happiness, something that you can measure. Gallons of gasoline, water use, the number of animals that are killed or saved, air pollution, exercise, pesticide use, waste, trees, the amount of fish in the sea, childhood obesity, time saved, tons of landfill, methane, urban runoff. You can see that all of these can actually be measured in the real world. Now, this is opposed to business data. Now, some people, when they're starting up projects, they lose sight of this difference between the real world metrics and the business metrics. And these are things like clicks, views, subscribers, sales, likes, you know, press coverage, like, oh, we got it in a magazine and we got 1 million Facebook likes. And people can get very attracted to this sort of data. Or we got 1,000 people to turn up to our conference, without realizing that that may not be affecting the real data at all. So you need to make sure that the only purpose of doing this is to affect the real world data. Again, it might sound incredibly obvious, but if people weren't making this mistake all the time, we wouldn't have to be having a slide about it. And so the wonderful thing about focusing directly on the data through a creative process, a structured creative process, is that it can unleash amazing ideas and amazing innovations. So here are just a few examples of how we're using better types of measurement to come up with novel, innovative ideas. And all of this stuff can be applied to water. It's not what are these examples, but think about how you could use it. So this is something called the Glow Light. It has a sensor, and I know the guy who made it. It sticks on like a Band-Aid to the main cable that comes into your house, and the light glows depending on how much energy you are using. So these satellites, I know the people who make these satellites too. They're small satellites and they photograph the entire Earth every single day. It's as close as we have to real-time satellite imagery. You might have seen these bicycle counters in some places around the world. They count the number of cyclists. I personally think it's a little bit ugly. It could be better, but it's starting to count and it's starting to get the data, which is great. There's so many different ways we can use aircraft, so thermal photography and LiDAR. This is a necklace that you wear that measures the air pollution as you're walking around. So people all over the city, should they be wearing these necklaces, they could be collecting air pollution, really granular air pollution in real time all over the place. This one is a scale. At the moment, we have no idea how much garbage we make. No one tells you, right? It's not measured, but we could have a scale on a garbage truck. So we are measuring every single load so you can get a report and a chart. And that's the basis of gamifying how we can create change. And here's a lovely thermal image taken by a drone or an aircraft. So we can see, you know, the hotspots, the literal hotspots in cities. And we're getting this revolution now where there are sensors everywhere. These are a bunch of small sensors. Often they're $1, $5, $10. They're not expensive. You can hook them up with an Arduino. You can watch a YouTube tutorial and get a soldering iron. And a lot of this stuff is really doable. This satellite here, I knew these people. I was sharing a house with them in Silicon Valley 7 years ago, soldering together their first satellite. And now they raised $300 million and the satellites are all over the world. All technology starts from something small, so don't be scared of getting stuck into the sensors. I know I wanted to take you through some of my own ideas or designs. This is the type of design work I do when I start to think about how can we show environmental numbers really big and publicly to everybody. Okay, so this one's a billboard, an electronic billboard. Instead of it showing you, advertisements for something dumb that we don't need, why don't we use these billboards to show the fuel? Because when you go past a big billboard, you're in a car. A car is a time when you can reflect on how much fuel you're using, to gamify it, showing how much it is and whether it's going up or down. This one is for the amount of energy, the megawatts of energy a city is using. It, you know, goes down at night, goes up in the day, peaks during the evening. We can disclose this in a big public way in the middle of a city. This is one called the V-score. Instead of just telling people that you need to go vegan or not go vegan, is binary black and white thing, which can be a very difficult hurdle for a lot of people. Why don't we measure the ratio of plant food to animal food and then nudge people from levels, like a game, like a video game that has 10 levels. And so you can go from level 1 to level 2, increasing your ratio of plant to animal calories on a menu. What about air pollution? Currently, the EPA measures air pollution only in one location per city. Now, cities are really big, and the air pollution can change dramatically over from mile to mile, block to block, even house to house. So why don't we have a sensor on the digital screen showing people with a color, with a number in real time, so people can see what's going on with air quality, and hopefully that will activate the community to take more action. You can have little ones here, they can be everywhere, big, little, all over the place, not hard to do. Global CO2. You might reflect back to the first time you became aware of what global CO2 was. I think for me, it was about 10 years ago when I really started looking it up on the NOAA website, and I read through, and it hadn't reached 400 then. And I was like, oh my God, it's going to reach 400 soon. And I really didn't know, even though I'd been in the environmental movement for probably like 15 years before then, I didn't know off the top of my head what the parts per million was. So this data is collected every day. Why don't we put this on a really big screen in a public place? This is in New York for everybody, everybody to see. So everybody can have that type of environmental literacy. Okay, this one is to show you the kilowatt hours that a commercial building is using. It shows you the place, the social rank, and then the kilowatt hours. At the moment, if you walk into a building, you have no idea how much electricity or CO2 it's using. And it could be done beautifully with orbs like this that show you through the use of color what the carbon emissions are. And considering we're talking about water, maybe they could be floating around. Maybe it could be sensing water quality and then showing the water quality using color like that. Like this is one I worked on for solar. So the whole idea was, how do we get more people to use solar? So I got these images. I looked at Google Satellite View, and I looked at this and I thought, wow, you can actually see the solar panels pretty easily on the view, right? So they are in a circle in case you can't see them. And so I thought of like adding it to an app. My job was to design an app. So I went onto Mapbox and I thought, well, why don't we give everybody a sun who has a solar panel, and then we can add up, this is the idea about disclosing the data, how many solar installations there are per block. So I worked this out. This one had none, this one had 2, this one had 1, and this one had 4. You can see there's a little cluster there. And so everybody gets a percentage score of how far they are to having 100% of the houses have solar. This is another one I did for zero waste, putting the, using this idea of a progress bar to track getting to zero waste. A progress bar might sound so simple, but a progress bar is ingenious because it takes you from the beginning of where you are measurably to the end, and it tracks progress in between. And that is what is going to get your project over the value action gap, that you're constantly tracking progress through the design. And this is using color as the main metric of change. So when you look at the CO2 emissions from the grid in California, you can go on a website, California ISO, and there's a really great chart that shows you the CO2 emissions that change every 5 minutes, but you can't really tell where anything is on the chart because it's just black and white. And you have to kind of remember another day as to where it was. So I created this color spectrum because the data went from 0 all the way up to 14 kilotons of CO2 per hour. And now we made this project called Energy Lollipop. We can see exactly how bad the grid is just by the color. And I'd been working on this for months before I actually started to remember what the color was, the number was. All I would see was the color, and I'd be like, orange, red. Because we immediately understand and remember color much more than we are going to understand words or numbers. This is one using satellite imagery. Satellite imagery contains a vast amount of knowledge about like temperature, It gets used a lot in measuring water resources, and in terms of vegetation, this is where the satellite imagery can display what is a plant and what is not a plant through the infrared spectrum. And so I thought it would be fun if we could just calculate, based on the amount of pixels, the percentage of green cover and put it on a web-based app. Currently, this isn't being done. It gets done in scientific reports. It doesn't get done for websites. Another one I'm working on using high-resolution thermal photography. Thermal photography also you can see a lot in terms of water bodies and water movement through thermal photography. But in this case, we're looking at urban heat islands, and the trees are cool, and you can see the roofs are very hot. And we put this on a Chrome extension. If anyone wants to download it, if you look up Energy Lollipop, Energy Lollipop in the Chrome extension, you'll be able to get that and see how much the California grid changes from minute to minute. And this is an idea for putting it on all of the digital screens. We show the stock market everywhere, we show the time, we show the weather. Why aren't we showing the biggest issue of our time, CO2 emissions, on these screens? This is just an idea, but I would love it if it would come true. We also made it into a Twitter bot. And why can't we put numbers out like this? A lot of people have a Nest now. Why can't we have something like a Nest that shows the color and the CO2 emissions of our home in real time? They can be on appliances like this to get people to use less electricity in the very peak times and more electricity in the low times. And why can't that be out on the street like this? You walk down the street in a public place at your library or your town hall, and you can see the CO2 emissions of your neighborhood on a screen up there on the wall. And this is a fancier incarnation of this using for Magic Leap. They're augmented reality glasses, so you can see like a layer, like a film of an imaginary world over the real world. We can hook this in to real environmental data, so you could potentially walk down the street and actually see the environmental impact around you. Maybe if you were looking at a lake or a water system, you'd be able to put on goggles based on sensors and be able to see that. It's pretty sci-fi, but it's fun. It's fun to design, and these actually exist. This is another one. If imagine you could see air pollution through these glasses. And this is what I call Fitbit for the Planet design, where we get data. We use a feedback loop. So rewarding the feedback loop. This is what these icons are for. Every time somebody does well, you give them a feedback loop. And it goes round and round in an upward spiral of positive change. And so the core thing to understand with this whole style of design is that an idea is only a hypothesis. People come up with ideas all the time to try and make the world better, you know, and people come to me often with their ideas, asking me for advice or if I can help design them. And most people won't tell you this, but that an idea is only a hypothesis when it comes to changing the world. If you want to start a concert or a festival or an app or a startup or whatever it is, and they think, oh, I've got this idea and I think this idea is really going to change the world. You've really got to see it like a hypothesis that has to make it through the scientific method. And, you know, did it create a result of measurable change or did it not? And that's why where measurement-driven design is so powerful, because it's just based on the measurement. Does it affect the numbers? Does it not? Okay, the next bit of measurement is coming up with your goal, where you want to go. Again, this might sound really, really obvious, but this is a trip that I do a lot. So I start down here in San Francisco, and then I put in my GPS, and I go up here to Mill Valley, a little mountain town I like to go to, and it tells me how to get there. Now, you would be amazed at how many environmental projects do not do this. They do not have the destination of where they want to go. So basically, it's really simple. You go from here to there. We're producing this much pollution. We're trying to go to this much pollution. And that creates basically the skeleton of your project. And so you want to see, once you create the skeleton of the measurement of where you are now and where you want to go, you know, you start to harvest ideas from looking deeply into your data. And this is something that I'm deeply passionate about and that I really love to do, which is bringing measurement to the center of the creative process. If you get a spreadsheet of all of this data, you put all of this water data, all the different things that you can measure, all the places it's coming from, and you sit with those numbers and you look into them and you think, well, how could I change it? What could I change? And you start looking for patterns and ideas. I mean, that's where you're really going to come up with powerful ideas that are really going to change the world. And again, putting this into this progress bar, like when you look at this system of the beginning and the end, and you track progress in between here, and you reward progress, when you're constantly ideating and thinking and innovating on how do I get this progress bar to move? I mean, that's when you start to get into really, well, I do anyway, into really great ideas that can really actually make a change. And that's the kind of the power space in environmental innovation to get into. Okay, so moving into the next step is visualization. So let's say at this stage in your project, you've measured everything you can measure, you really understand the data, you want to know where you want to go numerically. What does this world look like? This is the really fun bit. So there's this amazing quote which sums it up by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. He was a French writer and aviator. He said, if you want to build a ship, do not drum up the men to gather wood, divide the work and give orders. Instead, teach them to yearn for the vast and endless sea. And when we're talking about saving the planet, what this means is don't doom and gloom people and scare them into thinking that that's going to help them save the planet. Start to illustrate a vision of where you want people to go. People want to know that there's a beautiful future ahead of us. They don't want to know that the future is terrible, and so now you should stop being a bad person. That's not a very resonant message. So in this step, it's chapter 3 in my book, I asked you to go through an imaginative ideation process of just mind mapping this beautiful world. This is one of my favorite architects. He's really special. He made this illustration of a building. It's called the Dragonfly, and it's actually a vertical farm and an office that grows vegetables. This is Paris reimagined, all green as an eco-city. I mean, maybe your future world isn't that elaborate. Maybe it's just that children grow their own fruit and vegetables at school. I recently enrolled my daughter in school for the first time. There's one school I found, actually no, 2 schools I found that actually grow their own vegetables. And I went and looked at a whole bunch of schools and their yards are all concrete, right? This is a very noble and important thing to do. And you can make it high tech as well. This is another Magic Leap design I did. You know, what if this was an ugly industrial picture of a city and I photoshopped it into what it would look like if it was completely covered in green roofs and green arches. And we want to be careful. So this is all the good stuff about why it's amazing to envision the future great world. But we really want to be careful of using too much doom and gloom messaging. And it's a mistake that happens all the time, which is that people will copy the behavior that you want to show. So that's why you want to show the positive behaviors. Here's somebody doing the great environmentally thing. This is this happy person. Look what they're doing. But sometimes we make the mistake of putting a picture of somebody littering or something like that and being like, don't be like this guy, because we all want to copy everybody. So, for example, it's really obvious with advertising. In this is a picture of a Mercedes-Benz ad that I did. You'll never see Mercedes-Benz doing an ad like this. Women ignore him, but it's actually because he drives a crappy car. Never, ever. This is what Mercedes-Benz does, right? They decide, they go and speak to a whole bunch of men. They find out the ultimate male fantasy. They discover that what men want more than anything in life is to drive a black sports car with 3 supermodels dressed in evening gowns cleaning the car for him. So they discover this phenomenal insight. And so they make their ads show, you know, what men want, right? So with our environmental work, we need to think about what is the ultimate future that we want. You know, we want beautiful, vibrant eco-cities with flowers and children playing, and permaculture gardens cascading off the sides of buildings. We want to do meaningful work and live in worlds that aren't violent and aren't polluted. We need to start illustrating this world, right? The same way that advertising companies illustrate their type of aspirational world for their product. And so in this example, another some evidence about why you want to be careful with negative messaging is in the petrified forest in Arizona. There are all these petrified rocks. And they had a sign up that said, your heritage is being vandalized every day by thieves. And so what this does is says that there's a social norm. It says to everybody, everybody else is doing it. Everybody is stealing. They changed the sign to simply say, please do not remove the rocks. Whoops. And then the rock theft went down by 50%. Just by not telling everybody that everyone else is doing it. So don't make a message that says 99% of people are terrible citizens and eating meat. It's going to backfire. Okay, so what you want to do in this exercise is come up with the measurable goal from the last section that you figured out in numbers where you want to go, and then just start mind mapping it. You know, idea. It's a wonderful process to go through. And I try and tell people to come up with 100 ideas. Don't think that you just have one idea and you need to baby it. It is the only idea you'll ever have. Keep coming up with more and more and more ideas. And you want to keep your imagination fertile. You should be able to come up with ideas constantly. They're all out there. You've just got to be looking for them. Okay, so now moving into to action. So you should understand the numbers. You have a beautiful, vibrant vision of the world you want to get to. Now we really need to get into, well, what is it that we need to get people to do? What action are we going to get people to take? So the first step is to just figure out what it is. Like, a lot of people haven't thought about the actual action that they need people to do, right? It could be just recycling, or it could be getting a senator to sign off on something. So you figure out who the person is, who is your target audience person, and then what is the action? And then here, what is the result? How is that action going to impact the numbers? And you go through this process called the behavior mapping exercise. And I've got a detailed map of this, of how to do this, actually on my Medium page, if you can try and find that article. And so we get our actor, our person, we ask how will they first see it? And then we take them through a series of steps through their day. And how will that action create measurable change? When somebody wakes up in the morning, how are they going to find your project and what are they going to do? And one thing that you can do to try and figure out what action, how to get people to do these actions, it doesn't need to be high tech, right? You can use this thing called pledges, and I think everybody should do it because it's free, it's easy, and it really works. Now, deep in the human mind, we want to create trust with each other. If I make a promise to you, I will feel like I need to keep that promise. It's very powerful. So what you can do is make these cards and get people to write something on it, like, I pledge to make my own lunch. You can make an event, you can photograph people and put them on Instagram. The more public you make it, the more people like they need to keep their promises. You can do it with paper. There's no reason why we shouldn't all be using this pledge mechanism. And that will work better than any documentary or book or magazine or like elaborate festival or conference, just getting people to write it down. And in this example, where they got it to work really well, there was an issue in Canada of parents driving to pick up their children from school, and the people, they all leave their cars on while they're waiting for the children to come. And so it was creating a cloud of air pollution. So they put up all these signs that said, please turn off your engine, and none of the signs worked. Because basically education is not very powerful for creating change. So then they got a group of volunteers and they went around to each car and they asked all the parents in the cars if they could make a pledge, if they could sign a thing to promise to turn their engine off. And they gave them a little sticker to put on their front windshield that said something like, you know, I'm a air pollution friendly parent or something, to create that kind of identity. So after they went around and asked for the pledge, 73% drop in cars doing engine idling. Remarkably powerful, and it doesn't cost anything. This is one that I did with my little zero waste meetup in San Francisco. I tried it out. I got everybody to write down a pledge. So I have a meetup, right? People have meetups and events all the time. You can close your meetup with a pledging exercise. And I just got everyone to write this down, and you know what, it really worked. I did not follow up with anybody, but then they started sending me like pictures of all of their pledges. And I met with this guy like a year later, and he was like, Katie, I'm still making my own toothpaste. It's quite remarkable. Okay, now moving into another type of behavior. This is altering the environment. It might sound obvious, but often people are thinking through elaborate campaigns or projects without thinking about just adding more physical facilities. Like, instead of making a big documentary about how bad plastic is, or a big like Instagram project, maybe you just need to put in a water filter station so people can fill up their water bottles. Maybe you need to put out signs for people that go on their doors to remember their reusable bags. And in my house, I put up a rack like this. I bought it from Amazon. It was $14. I installed it with a drill because we had so many bags in our house. We lived with 14 people. And the problem wasn't so much the people or the education or that people didn't care. It was just that we just didn't have a system in the house. So I put all the bags on the rack, and then straight away, it took about a week. People had stopped filling the house up with bags, and they started using these bags that were on the hook. And this one called the foot in the door technique is really interesting. Sometimes people think in the environmental movement that we need to kind of push people into making really big dramatic changes fast. Otherwise, we are enabling people to take the easy way out, which really is not true. So in this example, the study was done about 30 years ago. A group of researchers went round to a group of houses, and they asked people to put in a really big sign that said, "Drive carefully." And hardly anyone, I think like 99% of the households, refused to put in the really big sign. They went round to another neighborhood and they had a really small sign. And the small sign was small, and most people said, "Yeah, we'll put up the small sign." So they went back to the signs in the small neighborhood 3 months later, and they said, "Could we put the big sign in now? Now you have the small sign, could we upgrade, to the big sign?" And it was crazy. 76% of the people that had the small sign went to the big sign. So something like this about, going vegan, which is a really big change for a lot of people. If you're telling everybody to go vegan, you are having an experience kind of like asking people to install the big drive carefully sign. If you're asking people to do meat-free Monday, or just maybe have like one meal, one vegan chicken nugget, just one little tiny vegan chicken nugget, then the next time the bigger message comes around, they might be willing to be like, "Okay, I'll go from vegan chicken nugget to maybe a whole day of meat-free." And then after maybe 6 months of doing, or maybe a year of doing, one day meat-free Monday, they may actually be able to take on the big sign, to make the big change. So always use tiny hooks, tiny little changes to kind of bring people in that will enable you to make the bigger asks later on. Okay, this is a popular one, using this concept of social norms, which is just telling people that everybody else is doing it. We cannot help but copy others, and we can leverage this in our communications. So in this study, they worded this little flyer hanger thing that hang where the towels were in hotel rooms that said, 75% of the guests who stayed in this room number participated in our new resource-saving programs by using their towels more than once. So you can see with the wording how it says everybody else did it, not just like a tiny amount, but 3/4 of people did it. And this room number where you are, showing the similarity, that by wording it just in the phrasing, that this got a 29% increase versus the flyer that just said, "Please reuse your towels," right? So we can just make these tiny adjustments just in language to give a really big result for the environment. And this is a fun one. In college campuses where men shower together, and apparently men need to use a lot of soap on their body when they shower, they wanted to get men to turn the tap off. So they would put soap on without the shower being on. And they put up this sign that says, "Please help save water and turn the shower off while soaping up." And just like the engine idling sign, it didn't do anything. So they hired an actor. So the actor went in, he turned the tap off and, started soaping himself up. Now, it really was successful. After they put one actor in, 49% of the boys in the shower started copying the behavior. Then they put a second actor in, and then they got 67% of it. So if anyone ever says to you that, individual behaviors don't work, or, we can't change the world through individual action, just remember that every time you do an action, every single person that sees you doing that action will start to copy you. And this is how change spreads through societies, through people copying the actions of others. It's much more powerful than just the individual action in itself. And when we're talking about data to affect change, there's this word called agency. It's a critical word to understand. And I learned it from when I started to learn more about designing games. And it means motivation or empowerment, not just being motivated, but feeling like I can affect a system, like I have agency to affect my apartment building's environmental footprint, versus I feel unempowered and like nothing I do matters. That would be the opposite. And real-time numbers, not numbers that get stuck in a scientific report, but numbers that are fed back real time, that really maximizes agency. And the best example of this is the Toyota Prius dashboard, that as you drive, you can actually see it in real time as you are driving, as you are literally in the driver's seat. You are seeing your environmental impact. And this really works. This is a great example of what we want to do across all environmental behaviors everywhere. And this is one, I did the same model for this. This is in the University of Santa Cruz. It's in a dorm, and it shows you the garbage, how much garbage all of the different dorms create, and it orders them. And as the garbage truck moves around, it sends a signal and it updates the screen. We see these in speed schooling zones, these things that show you how fast you are going. These reduce traffic speed by 14%, real-time numbers. And we can use, and so what these numbers do is allow us to use comparison and leaderboards. If you don't have good numbers, you can't compare one group to another, a school to another school, and you can't put individual people or businesses or lakes or rivers on a leaderboard. So this is a really exciting design technique because it's been proven over and over again to work. So this company called Opower does this in your electricity bill, how they compare you to your neighbors and they give you a smiley face. That's called a reward mechanism. You say, good job, smiley face, when people do well. And Opower's chart's got a 3% reduction in the electricity consumption. And now 3% might sound small compared to the bigger numbers that we've looked at before, but 3% is about how much carbon dioxide is emitted from aircraft. So this is the same as taking a whole city's aircraft off. And it's actually pretty big in the scheme of things. This is one design I did for creating a leaderboard for all of the apartments in a building. Imagine if you could see your apartment compared to everybody else's. This would naturally motivate you to want to change. And it doesn't need to be high tech. The Greenpeace use comparison and color, and they're really good with putting out these type of these little graphics that get a lot of press coverage. So this one is, see how they've used colored red on one side, green on the other side, and then they've ranked all of the different technology companies, and they use this to sort of drum up hype for pushing them to get better environmental performance. And if you want to go high tech with color, we saw the energy light, this light here that uses LEDs. It's not that hard to get colored LEDs, to get an Arduino, and to write a basic bit of a script that tells the lights, you know, what to do. Like if you have some water quality issue, can you have it show a light depending on the water quality at the time? Can you have that feedback loop done, and can it be electronic? This is something I'm working on using color, getting iPad-sized screens that show the energy, this carbon intensity of the office building at any time, primarily using color. It's really powerful. And you can put them all together. Like in these examples, you know, these apply star ratings as well. So if you look at car safety ratings, something that we're really familiar with, one, the government makes the data for car safety ratings, has to be put out. You know, the companies don't do it by choice, they have to do it. So the data's out there. Then they put them all in a leaderboard. Then they apply color, so you can tell that, you know, you don't want to be in one of these cars. And then they apply stars as well. So they're putting all of the gamification and the data layers on one design. Oh, and then you've got this vehicle. This is how they do vehicle labels in Europe. They have the numbers, they have the color, and they have the rank. It looks simple, like you've seen it a million times before, but I tell you what, we have only just touched the tip of the iceberg with applying this basic design style to environmental issues. Another thing you can do if you want to get people to change is just making like a simple behavior chart like this. I did this up on Canva. You just get dots, you get a sticker. You would have had them when you were a child, but you don't need them just for kids. They work for adults too. plastic-free challenge, meat-free challenge, whatever the challenge is, make them up. And you can do it high tech. This is one I did for an app that I designed for a commercial bit of software, that every time they got a solar installation done, the company got a sun. And you can give people these badges and rewards that come up in gamification, but when somebody does well, you reward them. Here we go, the reward center of the brain. You want to give the brain a cookie. And this is why I'm not a big fan of Greta Thunberg's approach and other types of people that are very doomish about the planet, is that there's not the mechanism of giving the brain a cookie. You know, you don't want to freak people out. You want to make people do an action, just kind of like a horse that you feed a sugar cube to, or a dog that you give a snack to when you're training them. You want to train people and give the brain a reward. And it can be in smiley faces, it can be in good job, and that's what the badge is in gamification design. Now, I had a friend who worked on Wikipedia and did a study on this, and all they did was give Wikipedia editors a tiny flower from editing Wikipedia, and they got a 20% increase. It was the tiniest change, but 20% increase is a big deal in people's traction if you can just add these simple reward mechanisms to what you're doing. And animals, emotive animals, really work. Some people think this sounds silly, but it is legit, right? In this one study, they studied an owl. It was a learning experience, and they gave one group of students an owl with no expression, and they gave the other students an owl that was smiling. And the ones with a smiling owl got 23% better grades than the not smiling owl, because this smiling expression made people feel relaxed, it made them feel happier, and that made their brain chemistry more optimized for learning because they were less stressed. And so with every software I design now, I try and figure out how to put an animal with a happy expression that responds to people's use of the software. And I just read another study recently, actually, that had a cat that either responded with like green lights on the ears and gave a smile, or it looked concerned with red lights on the ears, depending on how much energy people were using. And they said the cat that giving emotional feedback from this like electronic cat, it was better than any single other type of behavioral mechanism. So I should add a slide to this because I only just learned that. That quite possibly the emotive animal that is communicating the data is going to work better than basically everything I've been talking about for the last half an hour. Okay, and so we're coming to the end now. What all of this is, these are all of the principles I use to try and create measurable change on environmental causes. And I think it is just ridiculously fun. Like, I love to do it. I started doing this type of work because I was just doing it because I thought it was really fun anyway. And then people started asking me to do work for them and offering to pay me for stuff. And I just really can't get enough of looking deeply into environmental data and then thinking, like, how could I make this as fun as a game? How could I share the vision for the future world that could be amazing, so everybody's not dooming out and freaking out, but giving people a really positive aspiration for a world that we can believe in? And then figuring out how to create mechanisms of real change. Because when you start to see real change happen, there's nothing really as rewarding as actually genuinely changing the world in a real and measurable way. And so this all comes down to this idea of causality, that your project is highly linked up with the causal mechanism that's creating change. So you can say every day, I know we are working on the causal mechanism, and you are thinking in terms of your design thinking mind about causality, causality, causality. And that's the basis of my book that goes through the 10-step process. It's the basis of my design, and what I try and help people really start to see clearly is that their ideas are truly making change happen. And that's really where we experience the great joy in life, and the kind of like essence of the creative process of really making change happen. And the way I see this, just to wrap up, is that I think we all have this creative energy in us that's unique as our own fingerprint. And we often don't know how to cultivate that, or what it is, or how to use it. It can be a real journey to figure out what all of that is about. But when you find a project that's really based on good design principles, like everything I've just been going over, it becomes like a prism, and then you can channel your unique creative energy through that type of project that kind of illuminates your creative essence and shares it with the world. And I think our quest in life is to try and figure out what that prism is, to try and cultivate that prism. So every day we're getting up to work, we're using our own unique creative essence and we're sharing it, magnifying it to the world in the way that has the most impact. And this is something I try and do with my life, but I put my effort into making happen every day. Okay, well, that's the end. Thank you for listening to the talk. If you want to stay in touch with me, this is my email, apierkp@helloworldy.com. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm really active. I'm posting ideas and stuff all of the time. Sign up to my website, katiepatrick.com. I've got more free resources and downloads there you can get. And I also have a podcast where I interview different experts on data and behavioral psychology. And also, if you're interested in taking a deeper dive in this, it's all in the book. Everything I know is in the book, and you can follow that. And I think it will really, really help you cultivate your environmental change projects to help them have make more change and be more fun. So thanks. I will sign off now. Oh, and I think we're going to have questions. Okay, so I suppose.
Hey, Katie, thank you so much. Incredible. I would just invite anybody else to turn on their screen. I'm going to turn it into gallery mode. Just maybe wave, say thanks, incredible. I'm over here just like, yes, yes, yes. So thanks so much, Katie. Really appreciate that. If anybody has any comments or questions, I think we got maybe about 5 minutes. Perhaps, Kat, could you just share that question personally, if you would?
Yeah, sure. This is just such a brilliant presentation, Katie, and I was thinking about all of your ideas, and I'm just kind of wondering if you can talk a little bit about the process it takes from, especially those like public, I'm thinking of the billboard idea, like the process it takes from idea to like real world application. Like, who do you partner with and how long do those kinds of projects take?
Well, I do a lot of design, so it looks like it's far more prolific than it really is, because I can design stuff up in a few hours, but doing a real project takes a very long time. I don't know, everything's different. I mean, nothing I've done so far has become like really big. Like, I'm still in a nascent stage myself, like in where I'm at with this. I started to piece all this together a few years ago, and I was tinkering around with little projects, and I kept designing a whole bunch of stuff, and I wanted to share this way of seeing the world with people. So that's why I wrote the book. But in terms of like my first job I got with the University of Santa Cruz, well, I go through this process of like, I just imagine the ideas. So I put the design thinking process that's in the book to different things. So I think about, how would I apply this to waste? How would I apply this to air pollution? And then I start to think through it, and I'm like, well, I think it would look like this, right? So I had this idea for waste with the garbage trucks, that you would send people letters, you know, based on showing little charts of how much garbage they were using. And I thought I should just start calling people. So I just looked on websites for people who worked in waste, and I thought, well, I'll try and get 100 phone calls. I'll make just a mission for myself. I usually like to do things in 100. I'm like, I'm going to have 100 meetings. So I just started calling people and telling them about my idea, and people are usually very friendly in sustainability. It's easy to get onto people. And then eventually I got to the University of Santa Cruz, who had actually started implementing a system like this already. And then they were like, oh, we have, they said, we've actually got a contract now for $10,000 to get somebody to do this. And I was like, I'll take it. They were like, could you please? They were like, I didn't know what they were. Could you please do this? Could we please give you this money to do this? I was like, yeah, okay. I'll take it. Sure. And so that's kind of how that happened. But then it didn't really go any further because I didn't have more budget to put on it, and I didn't really kind of feel like doing it pro bono. Anyway, so that's what happened with that. But in an overall theory, I just realized that when I come up with designs and ideas, and then I just shop them around to people as an entrepreneur, people like it. And then they, in some other way, they'll come to me and offer me slightly different versions of it to pay me as a freelancer, which wasn't really my intention. But that has kind of been has been happening. So that's the Santa Cruz one. With Energy Lollipop, I was just lucky enough to find a co-founder who wanted to build it with me. So we just started building that, and we're looking around to find funding for that one. And other work I've done that I didn't show here, people will offer to pay me for something that's very similar to what my concept design is, and then they'll use it in their company. So I've got some building, they have a company that does building software that does that. I've got a fashion apparel label that's doing something with me now. So I would like to have all of my projects come to their complete fruition like they are in Photoshop. But I think I'll have to get back to you in 5 years and tell you where it's all gotten to.
Let me see. Katie, it's Mary Eggert with Global Waterworks, and you mentioned, hey, and I'm so thrilled. You just make it all so much fun, and as the comments in chat show that. But
oh my god, I haven't even looked at the chat. There's all these comments there. I didn't even open it. Oh my goodness.
Yeah,
I feel so bad. I've just ignored everybody all this time.
They were just cheering.
I'm a terrible keynote person. Okay, sorry.
No, so you mentioned at the start, like, it's not all about water, but water is climate. Like, water is flooding, and we have a challenge because water is also slippery. It's hard to manage. So getting a handle on one drop, as it's moving, or the metrics on it have been such a challenge that we literally move a car inside and outside of every home in the United States, the equivalent of that weight. Like, if we could have that measured and show like the burden you are placing by moving that in the environment. So what are your thoughts to all of us on getting water more front and center? You as a, generalist, save the planet person, what triggers would you pull, or what areas would you think we should be working on besides just getting the numbers down?
Well, in Australia, water is the predominant issue because we have really severe droughts, and the government spends a lot of money on advertising, like just plain billboard advertising. Like, there's commercials on television, billboards, flyers everywhere, and the drought. It's on the news every night that the reservoirs are down to like 30% or whatever. And water is definitely, I would say, considered to be a higher, more topical issue, more pressing issue than climate change, or it was when I lived there 10 years ago. But then you go to different parts of the world, and then there's a more abundant natural water supply, so there's not so much pressure on it. I mean, water's complicated because there's so many different types of water impact. Like, are you talking about sort of the ecological collapse in natural waterways, or are you talking about pollution in streams, or there's the ocean health, there's how climate impact affects weather. Then you've got just general, like, residential and commercial water consumption. So I think you'd probably have to pick, which one, like, you'd have to pick one. And then, sort of really get stuck into it. I think that also that, what I went through in this presentation is the numbers, almost like the data visualization side of it. There's another, the chapter in my book that I have also in a Medium post of using the hero's journey to tell a story, which I think is the most compelling way I've found to tell a non-fiction story in a way that is resonant. So it's like every water issue is going to be like, one water issue is going to be like water issue in New York, like people needing to swim. I read an article about, people wanting to swim in the, off the edge of Brooklyn in the water there, and not many people do it because it's polluted. Like, that water issue is going to be completely different to just reducing water consumption in another country. They're like totally different scenarios. So you've got to choose the very specific scenario, and then you go through these 12 steps in the hero's journey and start to really find the emotional hooks of why this matters to us. And so I can't think of what that is now, but I think if you go through it and really resonate, I think, the earth being this altruistic thing is not a very strong argument. Like, the earth matters, so you should care. Like, it's just, you're like, yeah, okay. But you can find these really kind of deep emotional kind of phrases and reasons when you start to be like, well, why should you care? Why? You know, maybe because you have a child and the child wants to swim and swimming matters and we bond with the memories, you know, and then you kind of weave it into like a childhood memory with parent and child. I mean, that's a really resonant sort of, you know, take it somewhere like that. But yeah, there's a deep storytelling component, I think, that we can all get like a lot better at in environmental communications.
Incredible.
Thanks.
Katie. Thanks, Mary, for the question. And thank you, Katie. That was incredible and a brilliant segue to our next session and overall the pods in general. As we are talking about words, we're talking about storytelling, we're talking about how can we create new narratives around these topics that are often pretty doom and gloom. And so, Katie, I want to thank you for just shedding more light on how positivity, how these narratives, how the hero story, if you would, is so impactful, and just incredible wisdom. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are out of time here, so we're going to send it over to Stephanie. Thank you again, Katie, so much. Appreciate it. Everyone, resources that Katie had shared will be also shared via the events page, as well as GWW Connect has an incredible group called Next Gen Water Advocates. So we're also sharing that link and sending folks to that group as well. Thanks again, Katie.